Okay, so I'm just going to continue with detailing, and I'm going to essentially have this section which is going to include some details like the one that I've shown here, and so the section line I've drawn there probably should be fleshed out at this stage so that I can have that showing the referencing correctly. And then I'm also going to have a section going the other way, which I'll use to pick up some of my other details as well. So I'm going to just draw a line. Oops, I snapped to something, so I'll just start that line again. And nominate where I'm going to take my section going through the other direction. And so you do need two different sections anyway, a cross-section and a longitudinal. This space is fairly close to being square, so I don't really mind which you call longitudinal and which you call cross. I'd probably call this one the longitudinal one and this one the section, the cross-section. So again, I want to have those showing with the referencing, which will make it a bit more obvious that they are sections before I start to do my detail. So a lot of people don't know there are library objects that come with AutoCAD. They're just buried away like a lot of the things in AutoCAD. And a good way of getting them is to use tool palettes, which is on the menu somewhere, but I usually would just type in tool palettes. So TOOLPALETTES, enter, and that'll bring up this tool palettes palette. And it's kind of useful. I haven't shown you this up until now because it's not really a good thing to rely on. You'll see there are lots of objects here, but they're set up by the guys at Autodesk, and they often use maybe some of the new features that aren't always the most workable. So I've been showing you the way that AutoCAD's been used traditionally, which is using things that aren't done with these new features like dynamic blocks. And have any of you tried to use dynamic blocks up until now? They're good in some cases, but I think sometimes they're more trouble than they're worth. And so you'll see here there are doors and windows in this palette, which is architectural. But again, they use dynamic blocks, which can be problematic. Also, a lot of this is set up for imperial. So you can see there at the top we've got imperial samples and then metric samples. So scrolling down there, if I go to annotation, you can see again we've got imperial samples and then metric samples. But there we do have a tag. Now I'm going to remake the tag, but I just wanted to show you this because it's a good way of just getting a basic size. So I'm going to click on the little scale tool there before I drag it and make sure I set the scale that I want this section to show at. Okay, so the floor plan, you see there, it needs to be at 1 to 50, so I'm going to set that scale to 1 to 50 because the section is going to show on that floor plan at that scale. So again, just zooming here. And then I'm just going to drag this call out bubble from the tool palette and place it somewhere in my drawing. Okay, now you can use that, and it is pretty good for sections. But watch what happens if I do something to it. If I rotate it to go this way, the numbers don't change, which is a problem. Okay, so there are ways to fix it, but it's probably easier to just use that as a guide and to make your own. It's kind of nice. Sorry? Oh, you can change the numbers. Yeah, that's easy. So they're attributes. If you double click on this, it is set up pretty well in that way because you can just change these values. So it's not a terrible block. Yeah, that's right. I don't want that. So it's fairly easy just to draw those things yourself, and it's good practice with your annotative options as well. So the only thing I'm not sure of there is the size of the text. So I'm going to measure that. I'd say it's, oh no, here we go. So for, I was going to say it should be about 2.5. Oh yeah, that's right, sorry, it is. So you can see there that is roughly 125 or 130 mil. So do you remember how to work out the size that would be in reality, the size when you set up your text? So if it's 130, let's say, well, I know the real size is actually 125. So if it's 125, our scale is 1 to 50. Okay, so 125 divided by 50 is 2.5. If you don't want to work that out in your head, type in CAL, enter, and then 125 / 50, 2.5. Okay, so I need to have a text style that's set to that size. So I'm going to go to my text styles there, and I should have my notes style already set to that size. That's using a different font, so I could always make another text style and call it something else, maybe, well, reference probably is a good one, since that's what we're using it for. And that way I can have a different font. But the most important thing is the height, 2.5, and then the size annotative. Okay, so I'm just going to remake this again. So what do you think would be the easiest way to make this? Exactly, just draw over the top of it with things like circles and lines. So I'm going to also make a layer for my references. So I'm just going to call this T for text reference. Make it the current layer. And yep, like you were saying, draw things like circles. Oops, sorry, didn't become the current layer, so I'll just choose that. Something odd there. Yeah, up to you. I'd usually make it white. But yeah, up to you, because I'm print black and white anyway. So I'm just going to draw a circle tracing over that, and then draw some lines for the arrow. And then a line going through the middle. And I can even do my text. I'm going to use single line text and snap to the text that's already there. Okay, so I'm going to keep the angle at 0 by pressing enter, and then type in 1, goes straight over the top, which is nice. And then for the sheet reference, let's put in an arbitrary value there. So A101 or something. Now we can see that that is going outside a little bit, or almost going outside. So you could always move that across. And if you want to, you can play around with the justification options to do it from the centre. That's up to you though. Okay, so that's done. I can move this over to the side. It's optional to have that hatched, so you could. I think it's fine to leave it open without hatching. So I can delete this now. I don't need that anymore, and that will be easier to use. You don't really need to make a block for things like this. It's probably easier not to make a block unless you like setting up attributes, in which case you could do that, but I'm just going to leave that as lines. So I can copy this to the line that I've already drawn, top and the bottom. Maybe change that line to the same layer. Yeah. One of the best reasons for getting a high-res monitor is so that you can fit more on the screen with AutoCAD. Anyhow, this one isn't that bad. So now I'm going to use stretch. going right to left with a crossing. So you can bring that up. And then same at the top. Stretch again, and this time you can bring it down. You can trim those lines later. And then back to the one I started with. Now I can actually move this down. And maybe just so it's clear, I'll rotate it before I finish that. So I'm going to just select these lines that make up the arrow, and then using rotate I can easily snap to the centre of the circle and just bring that around 90 degrees. Okay, so if it's a block, all of those things are much harder, and so now I can easily move that there. Also, I can easily change the text for these just by editing that. So this section might need to go, I'll copy this over to the other side. Okay, so this section might need to go the other way, and it's fairly easy now, instead of mirroring the whole thing, just to mirror those two lines from the arrow. So again, if this is a block, which sometimes people assume you need, it's actually much more work to change this. If it's just lines, it's fairly simple to mirror there, and then yes to delete the original. And that's what I find with a lot of things like AutoCAD. Keep it as simple as you can. And lines generally will do most of the work. Okay, so now I need to have the section set up going to the left there. And just out of interest, how have most of you been doing that second section? Have you been projecting to the left, or are you copied and rotated the plan? Yep, that's fine. That's fine. Yep.
Even when you do elevation as well, that's a good idea.
It's not bad. So look, there's positives and negatives to both ways. So you can do the method I was talking about initially, which is to rotate the whole view. In some ways it is, because you're projecting from the same floor plan. So if you know you're going to keep doing more work on your plan, that's good, because you can then easily update your sections as your plan changes. But if your plan's fairly complete, then it's actually better the other way, because, and that's the way I'm going to do it the other way. So I'm going to copy this section, so copy the plan to the right, over here, and then rotate it. So I'm just going to select all of that and then rotate the whole lot, so that that other section line is pointing up, and I'll move that across. Okay, so now this section line is pointing upwards. Is there any advantage you can think of doing it that way, apart from the fact that maybe you don't need to know as many different tools, because you can do it all with copy and rotate? Yep, so it's easier in that way, because you don't need to know about rotating the view or anything like that. There's another big advantage. I can project across from this other section to check that my heights are right and line things up that way. So there are definite advantages to doing it this way as well. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to draw some lines now from this section. And then I'm actually going to start drawing this section by copying the section I've already done. In fact, I'll just copy the whole thing and take that over to the right. So I'm just going to make sure it goes before this line here, because that's the line of the wall that I'm projecting from. And maybe I'll draw a line from here as well. Okay, so because I've got these things here that are completely different on this section, I might delete all of that, and maybe even everything on this side too. So I'm just making windows to clear that. So all I've kept really are the lines from the floor, and I'll fill in the rest of the section later. But what I'm going to start with is the wall there. So I'm going to look at the detail where the section is cutting through this wall. And so with the layers that I already have, the wall stud layer, I can draw a line from the floor plan, projecting up all the way to the ceiling, which is this line here. And then another line on the other side of the wall, again projecting to the same place. You can of course copy those lines. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom into the base and have a look at that detail. So again, a bit of setting up to get to that point, but you've probably got more of that done than I have, so you maybe won't need to do everything that I've just done there. And so now I'm going to go into that Gyprock catalogue. I've just gone to the bookmarks section on the left, so you might need to have that open if you're going to use this file. And then I've gone to wall systems installation, and you'll see there it's on about the 5th or the 6th page, oh no, a bit further, of this catalogue. I'll tell you the number. Yep, so it's page 49.
48.
Oh, 48's on the left, and then 49 I think is the one on the right. So that's the page. Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, no, the next one, next page.
Next page.
Yeah, that's the ceilings. Yep. So you want the wall base details. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so yeah. So yes. So well, you should draw it on your section, and that way you're doing some of the work for the section as well. And then just make sure you do the notes with the scale for the detail, and then they won't show in your 1 to 50 section. And I'm going to do that anyway. So I'll show you that. Okay, so it's important that you realise this is just a basic section, mainly for the plasterboard. But you may need to add more to it than is shown here, and this is where you need to make decisions as designers. So I've just brought up or just done a quick search for some different details that are all fairly standard, and depending on the style that you've chosen for your design, you'll end up with often quite different, well, I'm going to call them skirting details. So the junction between your floor and your wall is essentially going to be dealt with using some skirting system, and you need to decide on that. So I'm not going to show you how to draw the skirting. You'll need to draw the skirting on top based on the system you choose. And so I've just brought up a few here. You probably have a pretty good idea of this one because you would have all seen it. So yeah, you'll need to add skirting on top of this. Yeah. So the wall floor junction detail will show the skirting automatically because it's always going to have some sort of skirting. So this is one of the most common. Would you know what you're looking at there? Oh, yeah, don't worry about the wall. So just forget about the wall and the floor. That could be anything. But then what we're looking at is the skirting. So that skirting there, what do you think that would be? Wood, that's right. So that's a wood profile. And that would be a pretty typical skirting that you would have in most houses. And it's an important thing actually because it covers the junction between the floor lining and the wall lining, because there should be a gap between those. Those two things shouldn't touch, and it's important that they don't because they're made from different materials, and so they'll expand at different rates. And if they're touching, especially if you put some sort of sealant that connects them, then you'll get cracking because they will naturally. So that's a channel. So that's for this particular system. For this particular floor system, they've got a channel that it sits into. But you don't need that. You can do it much more simply. Just have the floor lining continue under the skirting, which is quite common. It doesn't even need to touch the wall, so you can have a gap. So you'll have the floor lining there, just pretend that channel isn't there, and the floor lining would go underneath the skirting and then would have the underlay underneath it, and there would be a small gap instead of having that channel there. So that's just...
There wouldn't be a gap between the wall lining, the skirting and the flooring, would there?
Yeah, there would, yep.
Like millimetre?
Yeah, a couple of millimetres, or 5 millimetres maybe. Yep, so, yeah, yep. Yeah, and so they'll usually have, at the bottom of the skirting, you'll have like a quad profile, just a little round profile of wood that fills in that final gap.
Oh, okay.
And so that can be, and that way you can remove that if you want to change the flooring without removing the skirting. So just remove the quad and then, yeah, that's pretty common. Yeah, that's right, yeah, so they'll have just like a quad lining, or you'll have sometimes a plastic thing for different flooring systems. Yeah, so you should have a gap. It's really important actually to have that gap if you know, or if you think there's any chance of the floor lining changing, which with residential you should always allow for. So yeah, so that otherwise is a pretty standard detail. If you're going to do traditional skirting, but these days you probably want to go for a more modern detail in many of your designs. So, well, this one's probably the next. It's not quite the most modern, but it's one that's worth looking at because you've probably all seen this one as well. Maybe avoid this one, but I'll just sort of show you out of interest. Vinyl. If you've ever seen vinyl flooring with that vinyl skirting, that's how it's done. It's pretty horrible stuff, but it's a good cheap way of doing wet areas actually. Yeah, yeah, it does.
It's just like the vinyl.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and look, it's cheap. I think there's, environmentally, it's not the worst thing because using plastic for that isn't such a bad thing if it's a durable material, and it's cheap and easy to manufacture. But yeah, it looks maybe a little bit dated. So just thought I'd show you that one before we look at the most modern, which is a shadow line. So there are different ways of doing shadow lines. You'll see in that Gyprock catalogue they actually have quite a few as well. So I don't know. Do you want to know what I mean by a shadow line? Yeah. So that's one way of doing it, where you have a skirting that's flush with the main wall lining, and you've got a shadow line there that's above the floor line. That's right. Yep. Yep.
Just like 1 milli.
Yeah.
Maybe half something.
Yeah, 10 mil or something, yeah, or less. Yep. Yeah, it's really nice to have those. I actually much prefer them like this.
Yeah, of course.
At the
Give you a very like old photos.
yeah, they're great. Yeah,
Details,
yeah, that's right.
It's making it much difference.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah, they're really nice and much nicer than just doing the lining with nothing like we've got in this room here, which is pretty ugly. So that's a good detail and easy to draw as well. It's fairly simple, but you just need to make sure that you nominate some sort of product there. So it would mean that here you'd need to do things a little differently if you wanted to make it like that. So yeah, I think that's actually a really nice detail because it shows how to have different substrokes and things like that as well. Oh yes. So also in that Gyprock catalogue, you'll see there's a detail for wet areas. So if we zoom out there, so it's in the fire rated section, I think. So I'll just go straight to fire rated. Here we are. So I'm pretty sure it's in there. Here we are. Okay, so there's your, oops. So that's a wet area. Because I'm just going to give you the basic detail and then you can modify them and add these extra things in. And that's an important detail as well. And if you're interested, there is one here for a skirting. Oops, let's go past. There we are. Okay, so you can see there, that's a skirting with a shadow line similar to what I just showed you. So it's actually got MDF, and that's not a bad system, even though it's maybe not as sleek as the detail with the shadow line at the bottom. For if you're doing a design for families, if you know it's going to be that sort of dwelling, that's probably more appropriate detail, because kids and people who aren't as careful are going to damage the walls otherwise, and so that's really the purpose of the skirting there. It protects the wall because it's MDF instead of plasterboard, and I have seen people go through plasterboard several times. I'm sure everyone has. If you fall into a wall like that, they're not the strongest. Okay, so again, I'm just going to show you the initial detail. I'm sure you have a pretty good idea how to draw most of these things anyway. So most of the setup's just going to be getting the notes and other things to be the right size. Okay, so here we are. So there's the basic detail. I mean, you don't have to do all of the details. For a real project like this you would, but you only have to do one. So maybe choose your battles and go for a simple one to reduce your workload. And so again, I'm just going to draw this, get started on it at least. And yeah, wall-based detail, yeah. Page 49. Okay, so here it's important that I realise that the line I'm seeing here at the top is the floor lining. So I've got there the green lines, which are my slab, and that is what the wall needs to be attached to. So I'm going to trim using the two wall lines as my cutting edges, and then enter, and I'm going to then choose the lines for my floor lining, so they're cut away from inside the wall, because they would stop at the wall. And then I'm going to again trim, this time with the line of the slab as my cutting edge, and I'm going to cut then the two lines for the wall. Now, there are different thicknesses for plasterboard, but for this project you can just assume everything's 10 mil. So I'm simply going to offset 10 mil. Do you know any other thicknesses for plasterboard? Sometimes it's 13 mil, you'll see. And it can be other thicknesses. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but 10 is pretty standard. So, so I'm going to just offset 10 mil either side towards the inside. Now, at this point, I'm just going to double check my distance, because I've projected this off the plan, and it is what it is, but I've actually made it 90 mil in my plan. So if I come in 10 mil either side, that'll leave me with 70 mil, which I know is a standard size for studs. If yours ends up being a little bigger or smaller, that's okay, but it's good if you can try and use standard sizes. You'll see in this Gyprock catalogue, you can look up the sizes of your studs as well. Yeah, for the total wall, and then 70 for the frame. Yeah. You can go down to 57, I think is the smallest. So that'd give you a 77 mil wall, which is handy sometimes. You've got to make them really thin. Not really. Some pipes will, but not for drains. Oh no, definitely not drains. Oh yeah, for reticulation, like water supply, yeah, no problem. They can go into anything like that. Yeah, but the noise is an issue. So normally you want to make them a bit deeper because the depth does help with the sound reduction.
Something behind the toilet or something like that should be bigger than the floor.
Oh yeah, so for toilet drains you'll often need a you've got a pipe that's bigger. So yeah, they're thinner than you might think, but yeah, bigger than that. So they might need to be 120 or something. For a toilet, especially if you're going to do those ones that are fully integrated, where you've got the cistern and the drain in the wall, which you can do in a stud wall.
Yeah. You can't do it in the
You can, easily. Yeah, the toilet I always do specify for residential these days is one that has a cistern that fits into a stud wall. The whole cistern,
Yeah, right.
as well as the pipe.
Even in the drawing, it's
Yep.
coming.
Yep, the whole
Same
thing.
side, it's coming from the work side.
Yep.
Straight away.
Yep. So for those, I actually do double studs and have them offset and make it a 150 wall, but just to give a bit of extra room. But you can, I think, go down to 120. So yeah, so lots of options there. But again, this is just a simple wall. So now I've got to draw the stud in there that is at the bottom. So it's not really a stud; it's a bottom plate. They're all the same profile, but they just perform different tasks. So here the height of it really isn't that important, as long as it's roughly right. So I'm going to say it's about 40 mil. So I'm going to offset 40 mil from the floor line up. So I've got that line there, which is the top edge of this U profile you can see there. And then I'm going to offset, well actually, sorry, I better start doing my layers before I offset any more. So I don't have a metal layer, so I'm going to make a wall stud metal, and just make it a bluish colour, hopefully one you can see on the projector. And the line weight, it should be heavy, but you can't make it too heavy because it's going to have two lines. So I'm going to make it 0.25 and see how that works at 1 to 50. At 1 to, well, probably just 1 to 5 actually, so it should be alright. So I can put that layer onto, that line onto this layer. And then I'll just offset 5 mil, or even see if we can go down to 4 mil. No, that's plenty actually, so I can go down right down to maybe 2 mil. You would never do this the real size. In reality, it would be less than a millimetre thick. But if you draw it that thick, you won't see it. So actually 2 mil is even too much. So maybe I can go down to just 1 mil. Yep, that's alright. Yeah, I think it should be alright. And so I'm going to then just use trim to tidy this up a bit. So I'm going to cut with the outside edges there, cut that line back to the inside, and then again choose go to trim, and then you use that top line there and just cut these back. And then may as well keep putting these lines onto the right layer. Okay, so now I want to put this rounded corner on this stud. And so again, you don't need to worry about drawing it the way it is in reality, as long as it looks right. So using fillet here, I'm going to type R and then enter to set a radius and make that, I'm going to say 3 mil. And I'm going to choose these two lines. And actually that's too big, so I'll try again. So fillet again, for radius, and maybe we can do 1 mil. Yeah, it's not too bad. Now I might go back and do that 2 mil. So again, you have to just experiment here to see how it's going to look on the screen or in your drawing. So again, R and then enter. Yeah, this is sitting above. It's sitting above the concrete floor, below the floor lining though. Okay, so now I've set the radius. I can go and use fillet again to do the other side. And so now, this is the only really new thing I'm going to show you. Everything else is basically using tools I've already shown you. I'm going to change this into a polyline just to make it easier to offset. So, have any of you used the tool that you need to join lines together to make a polyline? Okay, it's one of those that was used a lot maybe in the old days, not used as much these days, but still important. If you go to the Modify panel, it's down the bottom, and you'll find one that says Edit Polyline. So it's probably just under Scale, but you might need to click on the button to expand the Modify panel and see it there. So you'll see Edit Polyline, so actually a really useful tool. And the shortcut is PE, which is Polyline Edit. So PE Enter will do the same thing, or you can go to Modify and choose Edit Polyline. So once you've done that, then you can choose any line. I'm going to pick on one of the lines there that forms my stud. And if it isn't a polyline, it'll say down the bottom, this is not a polyline, do you want to turn it into one? And you've got a Y in brackets there, which means if you press Enter, you're saying yes, I do want to turn it into a polyline. And now you'll get all the options for editing a polyline. I'm going to use Join and choose the arc, the line next to it, the other arc, and the line above. So basically all the lines on the inside of that bottom plate. Leaving the top for now. I'm going to press Enter, and that simply means now if I go and use Offset again and make it 1 mil, I can then select that object. It's now all one polyline, so I can click outside and it'll offset the whole line. I could at this stage go back into my layers and I can get it to come up. Okay, mine's just frozen. Just give it a second getting that to work. Okay, it should come back. There we go. Okay, so going back into my layers, and I can look at the line weight for my stud metal layer. So I can maybe go to 0.35 and just make that a little bit heavier. And then I'm going to trim now using the polyline that I've made on the inside, Enter, and then I can choose this. So all of that work to get a stud, but or it's really it's a bottom plate, but it will work just as well as the stud in section. And because I'm going to be using that a few times, I'm going to just select that and make a block out of it. So, yep. Oh, I'll come and have a look at it in a minute. I'm nearly done. So, so I'm just going to select that with a window, type B, and then Enter. Give it a name. So I'm going to call that Stud Profile. I'm going to click to specify a base point, so I'm going to use pick point there and just choose the corner, and then OK to make a block. Now you can see there it's got a bolt showing in section. You can actually just draw a line for that, so you don't need to show the bolt in section. You can just draw a line to show the fixing, and a dashed line work pretty well. So I'm going to change the scale now to 1:5, and I'm just going to draw a line through the midpoint, extend it down, and then show another little trick. We've had a look at line weights before, also line types before, but I don't think I've shown you that when you select something like a line, maybe the easiest way of changing the settings is to bring up properties. So you can right click and then bring up properties that way. And I'll put this over to the side so you can see we've got the colour, line type and line weight all set to by layer. You can change the line type to something different. So I'm just going to try and find one that you can actually see. Here we go, so -2. I'd actually want one of these others, so centre 2 is what I want, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But you can see there that's changed the line type, but it's still on this layer. So you can override any of those properties. It's usually good to leave them on by layer, because as we've been doing it, you can change the colour, line weight, and line types most easily just by going and changing the layers. But there'll be cases where you want an object to be on a certain layer, but to have a different line type to everything else on that layer. And so there it can be useful to change the option there in the object's properties. As I was saying, I actually want one of these centre line types, so I'm going to go for centre 2. But I can't see that because at this scale, even at 1 to 5, it's too big. So you can also override the line type scale. So I'm going to try some different line type scales here. So I'm just thinking, yep, sorry, going the wrong way. So I'm going to try 0.1's too small. Let's go for 0.2. Yep, that's okay. All right, so making it 0.2 makes it bigger. Oh, sorry, makes the dashes smaller. So, it's, you could say it's a wall-based detail or wall floor detail. So, otherwise we've just got the sealant, and that's simply going to be a line. So I'm going to offset that from the slab, just 10 mil. And then you can just trim that line either side, so I've just got lines there, which I'll just put onto my stud wall layer, and then you could hatch that. So that's pretty much it except for the skirting. So you can add the skirting over the top, and that'll depend on your chosen skirting detail. Okay, so it's important when you put the skirting on that, well actually, so you've got a few ways of doing this. You could extend the floor lining to the stud framing and then have the plasterboard finish above that, but it's actually okay to do it like this. You can have the plasterboard go in behind the wall lining and then the skirting would simply sit above. But if you're going to do this sort of detail, what do you think might change there? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. The floor lining would need to extend through to the stud framing. Yeah, because
You ended there on it.
That's right. Because exactly, you have to, because the plasterboard, the bottom of the plasterboard is exposed, so that's visible above the floor lining. So you would need to bring this up, extend the floor lining across. So again, it just depends on what you're.
You used the stand. You didn't put the gyprock yet.
And that's the gyprock.
Ah, that's the gyprock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
Showing the metal inside, some details, somehow.
the metal.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's this.
That's it's showing that.
Yeah.
That's enough.
Yep. For the wall base, that's all you need. That's the bottom plate, and then the others. You don't need to show the lines for the studs coming up.
Oh, okay.
That's assumed. So that's fine.
That's what we need, and also just editing the skirt, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you want to put a skirting on, that could go over the top. So that could just be attached to the wall, to the plasterboard, and then a gap underneath for the floor lining to come in. Okay, so I'll just do a note to make that clear. So you've got then the notes you can see here. And so, do you remember what to use for notes like this?
The leader.
Exactly, yeah, what we looked at last week, leader, spot on. So yeah, so if you go here and just choose leader, it should already be set up from what you've done previously. If it's not though, it's a good time to check that. And just note all of these things. So you would have the, well, let's start with a simple one, plasterboard. So I'm just going to click a point there. Turn ortho off. And so you can see that the size is already determined by the scale that I've chosen here. So that needs to be set to 1 to 5. And you don't need to click any more points than 2. If you just want to click 2 points, then press enter and you can type in your text for a leader. So and then you can of course copy leaders to save you making them again. Okay, so you can just copy the notes from there, and again, just make sure you get some sort of skirting system worked out based on your design. Yep.
But then on this page, it's not that junction with the wall, with the ceiling.
Yeah, so that's the other one you have to do. Yep. So that's.
It's one of this.
Yeah, that's right. So they actually show they're showing a cornice there. So that's not negative detailing, but you could do a shadow line if you want to instead of doing a cornice. That's up to you.
But that's the
Yep.
this one. This is not the shadow now.
Yeah, that's a shadow line.
This.
Yeah, that's it. So they're showing it there. They just didn't give you one for a floor.
That's for the ceiling and this one for the floor. That's the details you want.
Yep, yep, that's right. Just those two details.
We
Yep.
don't know about that.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep, sure.
I think after a while you'll be more clear.
Oh, that's right. A lot of it's just you learn by doing.
The construction one.
Yeah, that's right. Once you start to draw them, and a lot of it's just copying from details other people have done. But as you draw it, then you think about how these things go together, and it becomes fairly easy to work them out as well. Yeah, yep, sure. No, that's right. Once you start doing it, it's a lot easier to understand. And so I'll just very quickly make a layout to finish up. So I make a viewport on the layout here. So it's going to make a new viewport. Zoom in to find my new detail, and then set the scale to 1 to 5. I can see the text there showing. So that's it. You might not show even the bottom of the slab there, so you can always bring that up. That's all you need for the wall floor junction. And then you have wall ceiling junction, so again have a look in the GIFOC catalogue, but maybe do some other research to find that detail. And then we'll have a look at joinery drawings later today. And the only other drawing is your site management plan, which I'll try to fit in today as well. We'll see how we go. Time. That's the easiest actually, so we can do that next week if we don't do it today.